Hello and welcome to Erie Now. I'm Cindy Patton. Erie Now is a WQLN current events discussion program based on the Erie Community Foundation's Erie Vital Signs. It tracks indicators that measure Erie County's well-being in 8 different topics. This program will explore one of those topics, and that's education. We'll take a look at what is trending, first in early childhood education, and then we'll transfer over to taking a look at K-12 schooling in Erie County. We have formatted this program to include experts in the field of education and Erie journalists who cover educational news. What we hope to do is to provide some information and maybe even encourage some informed decisions so that all of us can become more involved in the overall progress of our community. So now let me introduce you first to our experts. Darlene Kovacs is the Associate Executive Director for Early Connections, which aims to coordinate quality early care and education in our region. Also joining us, Kate Phillips. She's the Executive Director of Pre-K for PA's Northwest Campaign. Pre-K for PA is an advocacy organization that seeks to ensure access to early learning for all 3- and 4-year-olds in the state of Pennsylvania. And now our 2 well-respected local journalists include Erica Irwin. She's the Erie Times news reporter who covers the education beat. She also happens to be a mom of a preschool-age daughter. And Lisa Adams is joining us, a news reporter and anchor for Lily Broadcasting. So I'd like to welcome everyone and then set the stage for this segment of the program. According to the Erie Vital Signs, the trend for early childhood education in our region is somewhat mixed or inconclusive. Enrollment in school-based pre-K programs has increased. However, participation in early intervention and federal Head Start enrollments have declined. So we'd like to start off a little bit with Darlene, that maybe you can explain a little bit about what Early Connections does and what this program brings to the community.
Sure. Early Connections administers 5 early care and education centers. 4 of them are within the city of Erie and 1 is in Union City. All of those are Star 4 programs, Star 4 being the highest possible quality rating on the Keystone Star system. We also provide professional development for educators and for caregivers. And in addition to that, we have considerable community outreach to help families understand the importance of early education and the opportunities that are available.
And I'm sure that's a key component into exactly what you do is to get more involvement.
Very much so.
And then we'd like to turn to Kate to explain what is Pre-K for PA. I've seen some of the commercials that have been out recently, and it seems to be that there's even a greater push that's going on in our community.
Well, so that's good news because Pre-K for PA is an advocacy and an awareness campaign. We're basically trying to bring pre-K up to be one of the most important issues in the upcoming election. So we're doing it purposely inside of the political cycle, and we hope that the legislators and the gubernatorial candidates are listening because we want, within the next year, there to be legislative action so that all 3- and 4-year-olds have access to pre-K. That requires a lot of funding, it requires a lot of political will, and it requires the people to really speak loudly and tell their legislators and their governor, whomever the next one is, that they want pre-K and they want access for everyone.
And I'd like to turn to our journalists who I'm sure are chomping here to really ask some of the questions that really maybe some of you at home are even thinking of.
Well, I guess I'll start that off, and you did say it's going to take a lot of political will and it's going to take a lot of funding, and I think the funding piece is the thing that I'm the most curious about because what Pennsylvania is already doing with K-12 education has been really hurting over the last few years. In the city of Erie, it's been deficit budgets for 4 years, ever since Superintendent Jay Adams stepped into the job, and so when what you're already charged with doing is seeing cuts, layoffs of faculty, closing school buildings, how can Pennsylvania really afford to put this new initiative forward?
Well, and the short answer is that all of those funding challenges are real and all of those funding challenges remain in place today. But Governor Corbett recently put $10 million new into pre-K and early education. Other states have done it. This is a matter of prioritizing and then finding the revenue streams that make sense. The Pre-K for PA campaign recently put out 3 issue papers. We're really calling them option papers to show, number one, what high quality means, and I'm sure Darlene would be interested in talking about that. That's one of the sort of things that we're really, really committed to is high quality. The second piece is about, where we stand among other states. How well are we doing? How poorly are we doing? Right now we're ranked 31st among the states that offer publicly funded pre-K. And then the third piece is the funding piece, and how are we able to pay for this? There are a lot of funding challenges in education. There are funding challenges across the board in programs in Pennsylvania. But this has to be a priority. There are ways to pay for it. They're going to take political will. But if we don't do it, we see that as a missed investment, not as saved dollars. We need to invest in our future. And the truth is that studies show, and there is scientific evidence to prove, that pre-K and early learning in the 3 and 4-year-olds actually reduces costs down the line, reduces it in prison costs. I'm sure you've heard the statistic that prisons are being planned based on 3rd grade test scores, right? That's startling. And then there's also reduced costs for special education in the early years, the elementary years. So there will be some return on the investment that's immediate and direct too. If you increase an entire industry, pre-K for all 3 and 4-year-olds, if you increase the accessibility to that, you're also going to be investing in the community. There's a major economic impact. I think it's $1.8 billion if Pennsylvania embraces this statewide, just by bringing pre-K learning online.
But you have programs that are in place.
Yes.
And we do have programs that are here, and according to Erie Vital Signs, some of them just aren't being utilized. So you can build the programs, but can you make them get there?
Yeah.
I think that continues to be a challenge, and that's part of what our outreach does, is to be present at community events, to develop and provide and distribute materials, to make direct family contacts, to really get out there into the community, as many of our staff do, and talk to people about the importance of quality and early care and education for their children. Some people don't know what the opportunities are. Some people are comfortable with, say, having a family member or a neighbor take care of the children, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they still need to look at what sort of educational opportunities is the child having. So I think a big piece of our outreach is getting out there and raising the awareness, and that over time has had an impact and will continue to do so.
If I would note one additional thing on that, we actually built in outreach into our funding papers to show that's an important piece. If we're going to invest in this, you have to talk about it, you have to advertise, people have to understand the opportunity. So we built that into the cost.
Speaking to the issue of accessibility, I know recently the Erie School District announced that they are going to offer preschool classes in 7 of their elementary schools. Do you think that's going to address some of those questions when a parent has that direct pipeline from their neighborhood school to, starting there at preschool, then going on? Will that help the situation?
I know that that's very much the hope as part of that plan, is to allow families to become familiar with their neighborhood school earlier than before, and to have a child in the school who then remains in the school. The flip side of that is there are parents who prefer to have their youngest children in an early care and education center. So there are 2 ways of looking at it, and 2 opinions on the parts of families that have to be respected and addressed.
I wanted to touch on the quality question too. I mean, how do you differentiate between what is quality early childhood education versus babysitting or convenient for parents because they're at work all day and they want the child there from 7 in the morning until 7 at night? What really goes on between 7 in the morning and 7 at night, and how does that compare to what might happen in a kinder, gentler time where one parent could afford to stay home and be that early teacher for their child?
Well, Pennsylvania has a quality assurance system called Keystone Stars. At this time, it is a Star 4 system. There is some investigation into looking at a 5th star being added to that. But there is a very rigorous set of standards that must be met for a center or even a family or group home to achieve a star and to move through the star system from 1 to 4. Those standards include the preparation and the education of the caregivers, the opportunities that are available for the children at the center itself. What do they do educationally during the course of the day? In addition to that, there's also a piece about working with and talking to the families. So there's a very important piece about communication with families as well. So that's a voluntary system. Not all child care or education centers choose to participate in it. It happens that we do at Early Connections. Many other across Pennsylvania and also in Erie County participate in STAR. So that's definitely one way of looking at quality. Another way of looking at that is the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is NAEYC, does certify centers. So a NAEYC certification is also an indication of high quality.
Quality in the instructors, quality in the overall program. Again, you know, to get the quality instructors or teachers, even at a pre-K level, again, has to cost money.
It does, and I think that's an issue that's constantly addressed, is not only the teacher preparation itself. Right now there's a considerable amount of focus being put on preparing infant and toddler teachers, because we have some very fine early educators, but we feel that, you know, infants and toddlers are a specialty area that needs to be looked at, and those teachers better prepared in that area. But part of the quality rating system for both NAEYC and for STARS includes teacher preparation and what are the qualifications.
I know Erica mentioned before we started the program that her child is in a private early education program. So if you got pre-K for PA through in the way that you envision it, what happens to those entrepreneurs who have started private pre-K type programs? Would it all be now school-based or regulated by the Pennsylvania education system?
Well, I think that my daughter's in a private pre-K as well, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to send her to that. You know, what's interesting about pre-K for PA is we don't envision it any one way. We have three things that we're looking at: high quality, mixed delivery, which, as Darlene said, when you're looking at pre-K delivery, not everyone believes that it should be in a school setting. Not everyone believes the same thing. And when you have little kids, 3 and 4 years old, you want to keep that mixed delivery system so people are accessing it and they're looking for those education opportunities. The third thing that we're looking at is access for all 3 and 4 year olds. And that's a really, really important piece of this, and it speaks to what you're just asking, because in some rural areas, there's zero access. There's not even a high quality pre-K opportunity available. And then if you look in more urban areas, sometimes it's a matter of affordability. So what the heart of the pre-K for PA discussion is that at the lower end of the economic spectrum, there are a lot of resources in place for families. One of the challenges is making sure that they understand those resources exist and are taking advantage of them, but the resources do exist in the form of Head Start, pre-K counts, and others. On the upper end of the economic spectrum, you have parents who have the ability and the good fortune to be able to choose a private provider and send their child there and pay that tuition. The real challenge is you have this enormous group of population. In Erie County alone, there are 4,400 school-age children out of the 3 and 4 year old school-age children out of the more than 6,000 who have no access to early childhood education. It's that group of children, when their parents are looking at their monthly budget, $8,000 for private pre-K education versus grandma's house, as you said, that's not even a choice. So, you know, it shouldn't be about having that choice or opportunity. It should be about access for all. So that's what we're focused on. And I believe that one of the things that's important is that we're not prescribing a certain way to deliver this. We want to be at the table, and we have put forth these issue papers that say, here are some options that work. It's happened in other states, and this is what high quality means. And let's achieve this together. The truth is, pre-K for PA cannot legislate this. Only the legislature can. So creating that political will is really what we're focused on, and we hope to be at the table if, God willing, that political will is robust enough to actually get you know, the political energy behind pre-K.
Obviously, parental involvement is absolutely at the core, particularly when you've got this early childhood. Obviously, you're relying on the parents to become educated themselves about the programs that are out there. How important do you believe that is in the success of the programs that you're bringing on board or that you already have?
I think it's absolutely essential. we know that it's very important that the caregivers and the families talk to each other and communicate as a team when it comes to the child's education and to the care that that child is getting. We believe that's absolutely a very, very important piece. Speaking to the economic side of that, to take it a step further, some of the research, and unfortunately I can't quote the source right now, but some of the research has indicated that if you have a working parent or parents and they have their child in a situation where they feel very confident in the care that that child's getting, they're going to do better at work. They're going to show up more readily. They'll call in sick less often. They are going to be able to focus on their job. And so you see that people whose children are in a quality, secure, comfortable setting that the family feels good about, those are the people that are going to go to work every day and be the best employees.
Well, I agree 100%. And I mean, I think that the fact that so many, I mean, Lisa alluded to it, so many families, these days have both parents working. There are very rare instances where the mom has the luxury to stay home, or the dad in some cases, but that luxury doesn't exist. So if you have a system, an economic system where daycare, childcare is such a prevalent part of the daily lives of your workforce, it almost begs the question, why not be educating? Why not have the high quality in that system? Because so many kids are already in it. And why not give them the opportunity that every kid gets?
Well,
and the parents, I think, if had the opportunity, would make that choice.
You had talked about access being even, and that middle of the road group. What do you want parents to know? If anybody's out there watching right now and say, wow, this sounds like awesome, I'm just like this is going to affect me. How do they access? How do they get involved? How can they learn more?
Well, I can talk about how you get involved in pre-K for PA, and then I'll ask Darlene to talk about how you can get involved and see what's available for your child, because there are resources available that parents may not know about. And of course, educating people about that is one of Darlene's job, and she does a great job at it, but people need to know that what's already out there. Pre-K for PA, though, of course, our goal is to activate the public. And so, if you are thinking, oh, this sounds great, this is for me, go to prekforpa.org and sign up. It's as simple as signing up. I mean, one of the things that we want to present to the legislative leaders and to the next governor is we have thousands of people who care about this. So just Pre-K for PA, sign up. And say, I support you, just your name and your zip code. So people, your Erie legislators know Erie cares about that. And then I think that it's important that people really become active in this community. Volunteer to sign your neighbors up. Spread the word. On August 8th, we're going to have Pre-K for PA night at the Seawolf, signing people up. It's about visibility. It's about feeling that public pressure, because the public pressure is what creates the political will. So spread the word, tell your neighbors, sign your husband up, sign your mom up, sign your dad up, and then let people know Erie cares about this. Erie already has a very robust conversation about pre-K. It's, in my experience with this statewide organization that I'm working with, it's actually better than anywhere else in the state that we can see. And the people from around the state are so impressed with it. Now we have to have our community rise up and sign up and show not only do our leaders care, but we care as citizens.
I'm still confused about there seems to be an inconsistency of this pushing for this, and then these programs that are already available that people are not taking advantage of. Can you explain why you think people are not taking advantage of Head Start or other programs that are already in existence? And also that rank 31st, is that based on the percentage of kids that are involved in a pre-K program or the quality of the pre-K programs across the state? I mean, that's kind of two questions in one, I guess.
That's okay. I really believe that part of the reason people aren't taking advantage is, and this is part of our ongoing outreach effort, is they're not necessarily aware of what resources might be available to them. There are scholarship programs available, CCIS funding, which is publicly funded subsidy for families that do qualify. I think that people need to continue to listen to what's being told, to learn about what the opportunities are. And then, quite frankly, we have a limited number of early care and education programs that can be considered high quality. And those limited number of programs can only take a limited number of children. That's part of the quality assessment. So with that in mind, expanding those opportunities by giving more opportunities for centers to open or to qualify through STARS. One of the things that Early Connections does in partnership with an organization called the Northwest Regional Key, we provide technical assistance to centers to help them move through the STARS from 1 to 4. So I think there needs to be not only an emphasis on parents want quality, the parents understand what it is and they're looking for it, but also more opportunities, more early care and education centers that do provide that quality care.
Why is pre-K only just now taking center stage? I mean, it's always been an issue, but it seems this is...
I'll be really brief.
We have to be a little bit
trying
brief.
to wrap
Yes,
us, but I think that's a
good.
great
It
question because the truth is, in the American political system, there are trends and there are conversations that happen and they swell, sometimes at an enormous rate. If you look at marriage equality, you know, that's a civil rights movement that happened almost in a minute when you look at the history of movements. How did that happen? Advocacy, social media, investment, there were major advertising dollars behind that, and people really advocating at the grassroots level. Why is pre-K important? I think that there's so much science behind it at this point that says pre-K really matters. It's hard to ignore anymore. You had President Obama mentioning it in his State of the Union address. That was the first time a president has talked about pre-K as a major national priority. I think the evidence is there. Pre-K works. It's important. Our 31st ranking is because we're not putting enough economic resources behind it, and we don't have enough access for children. But at the end of the day, this is a really hot issue, which is precisely why campaigns like ours at Pre-K for PA are hopping online, because the moment is now, and the political will to make it a reality for every student. The reason that some people don't access programs that are existing is because it's not available to everyone. So not everyone's shopping for it. You have to say, I qualify, I don't make enough money. Those are hard things to do. So access for everyone is the answer, not trying to cherry pick. And you know, it's hard to educate people on a one-on-one level. So access for everyone is really, we think, the answer.
We actually do have to wrap it up. So this has been a great discussion. This is exactly what we hope this program can actually do. So I want to thank Kate and I want to thank Darlene.
Thank you.
We're going to switch gears here. Instead of talking about early childhood, we're going to switch over to discuss the K through 12th grade level education. So we're just going to take a short break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. I'm Cindy Patton. This is Erie Now, a WQLN current events discussion program based on a series of indicators that measure Erie County's strengths and weaknesses. What we're going to take a look at now and explore a little bit further is education in the region, and we will focus on the K through 12 educational assessment. Joining us for this particular segment are Nancy Sedali, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Academics in the Erie School District, and Rick Scaletta, who is the Superintendent of Schools in the General McLean School District. Our journalists for this segment are once again Lisa Adams, anchor and reporter for the Lilly Broadcasting Company, and we have Erica Irwin, who is an education reporter for the Erie Times. Now, the Erie vital signs show that the K through 12 education trend is also somewhat mixed or inconclusive in some areas through measuring the school district's proficiency in assessment tests that cover reading, math, science, and writing. And the district graduation rates are also somewhat varied. I think the area to begin with in this segment would be a further explanation of the Common Core, which is a standards initiative that seeks to align some of the educational requirements and testing in all of the schools. And we're going to begin a little bit with Nancy because she's our experts in the Common Core, and it's not called the Common Core anymore as well.
Yeah, as we were explaining before the program began, in the Erie School District, we've begun to call it the College and Career Readiness Standards because it more appropriately describes what the goals of the Common Core actually are. So basically, it's a set of standards that tells us what students should know and be able to do at the end of each grade level or at the high school level grade band. It is not a curriculum. It tells us what students should know, but not how teachers should teach. The Common Core was developed by the National Governors Council. There was input from other experts as well, teachers, parents. I know that it was Sue Pimentel and David Coleman that were part of this whole movement, and the Common Core really has given us shared expectations across the board for what we should expect from our children, and I think has promoted equity in that way.
It sounded to me like it was like in medical field, it's evidence-based practices, what works and what is shown to work in some sort of a standardized form without being so standardized. Is it something like that?
Yes, they did take the best of the standards that were already developed through the states. They also looked at research, and they looked at the international benchmarks. So if you're saying that it is the best of the evidence we've had to draw from, I would absolutely say that's true.
Let's work backwards a little bit. Why the need to develop the Common Core? What was the evidence that students coming out of schools in different states and different cities were not getting the same quality of education?
Well, if you examine the standards that states had established previously, they were very uneven from state to state. So a student who perhaps was proficient in Kentucky would not have been proficient in New Jersey or Massachusetts. You know, there just was no guideline that you could go by to determine that. So I think that this has given us, again, more of a common and shared expectation across all states. And as far as what drove this, part of it was business. Businesses were seeing that we were not having students graduate that were prepared for college and career. Colleges were telling us that a number of freshmen needed remedial courses. And I think ever since 1982, with a nation at risk, there has been some concern that we're not globally competitive, that we need to improve our educational efforts. And again, I know we've all seen those charts where the United States will be ranked 25th or 21st in science and in math. I'm not a psychometrician. I'm always wondering, compared to what? Are we comparing apples to apples here? Because we try to educate everyone, and that might not be the case in some of these other situations. So,
Implementation, Rick, maybe you could talk about how you go about implementing that kind of career readiness program through General McLean School District.
Well, the standards are first and foremost the most important thing. They tell us what to teach when, and that's what we use as our guideline. Beyond that, one of the things that we are looking at is we've spearheaded an effort to get a grant through the Erie Community Foundation for a very powerful software tool called Win Learning. And what that does, when we're focusing a student on a career, the traditional approach has been interest surveys. What would you like to do? Do you like to work with people, with animals, et cetera? But interest, I think what we're finding is that a lot of students, that's not enough. For example, in 2012, the ACT showed that only 65% of a college freshmen go on to become sophomores. Obviously, there's we can talk about getting kids to go to college, but the other part of that is, do they finish? And so we have to do a better job of getting them into the proper career. And so the software to which I speak also takes into account their skills, which is very important, and it uses statistics that are available to say what jobs are available and what jobs in the Erie region are available. If I go to college and get a degree in X, and there are no jobs in X, have we made any progress? So one of the things that we're looking to do, and this software is going to be available for every student in Erie County and Crawford County, is to get students into better careers for which they are prepared, for which they have the skills that they need.
Do you find that maybe the guidance counselor's role within the school district also helps and perhaps to better guide?
Yes, absolutely. But the issue has been there for the guidance counselors, besides being strapped for time, is they don't have a lot of tools. The only tool they've had has been the interest survey and looking at kids' current records. This software is going to give them additional tools, powerful tools. It has the academic skill component where students will work to achieve a certain level in math, reading for information, and locating information, so that they can say, well, you have to be at this level if you want to do this career. So it gives them an additional tool. Most of the districts, including ours, have also added or continue to run career classes. For example, in General McLean, every student in the middle school will take a career class, and every 10th grader will take a career class. And we see it as a progression. Every district has a progression of their career education starting in middle school, maybe even elementary, and moving the whole way through.
And if I could piggyback on that, Matt Punt, who was our principal at Central, was named in December as Director of Career and Tech Ed. So he's taken on a new role of working with our social studies teacher to kind of do the same thing, bring career awareness to our students at an earlier age, because we were finding that they didn't have a goal. They didn't know in 5th, 6th, 7th grade what they wanted to be, and some of our urban kids just don't know how to navigate the system. So he's helping with that in terms of taking them to colleges and making sure that they're understanding what jobs are going to be available, as you said, in the Erie area. Businesses have jumped on board. He has career clusters even through Central. We have businessmen visiting Central and talking about what skills the kids are going to need on the back end in order to be employed. So I just recently attended the GE conference, and there was a whole strand on business there, and local business people attended in order to become more aware of the topics really we're dealing with today. But I think the fact that they actually moved Matt into that role is significant in Erie, and it speaks to the fact that we understand that that's an area that needs further consideration.
Nancy, just going back in particular to the Common Core, what do you think, it's become such a highly politicized issue, what do you think some of the misconceptions are about it out there right now still to this day?
I think that one of the misconceptions I already mentioned is that it's a curriculum, and that's not true at all. We have much leeway in the implementation of the Common Core. They're giving us a guideline and telling us where we need to be, but they certainly aren't dictating how we need to get there. I think a second misconception would just be that we're moving towards a national curriculum. I don't see that at all. The Common Core does provide suggested texts as guidelines, and those are all in the appendices, but they certainly don't dictate that these are the only materials that you can use. I mean, again, they're providing them more as exemplars. I think the mathematics is confusing parents, so I welcome questions from parents. I wish they would come to our PTO meetings. I wish they would come into school and ask, what's going on with the Common Core and how can I better support my child? Because it looks different than what they were doing when they went to school, I think they're a little confused at times about, you know, is this actually better for my child, because they want to drop back to the familiar a little.
Well, you said it looks different, and as a parent, that's what I'm most interested in finding out. How is this in practice going to be different from what I learned? Like, just give us an example of how a lesson following the Common Core standards might look a little different from what I learned in school.
Okay, if I could talk about the shifts. In language arts, the first shift is the movement towards reading more nonfiction, because the idea is that we're filling in the background knowledge for the children and enhancing their vocabulary. So, you know, if your children are reading nonfiction texts in the past, if they read, for instance, about Davy Crockett even, they may have gotten a question like, explain a time when you were brave, just like Davy was. Now you're going to have a question like, go back and reread your nonfiction piece and let's cite some evidence that shows how Davy was brave And we're kind of going to a read, reread, discuss, write model where they would have to really defend their claim. So it involves a lot more critical thinking and a movement away from those personal connections and the child really being able to answer the question without doing that close reading or looking for the textual evidence. So actually reading, writing, speaking, and looking for that text evidence is very significant, and we're working on text-based questions in the district and developing good text-based questions so that the children will go back and reread and do close reading, and we're doing instruction on close reading as well. Often the Common Core in English Language Arts has a visual that's a staircase, and that's because they want the students moving up that staircase of text complexity and the reading becoming more challenging at each point. So the parents might notice that the students are reading the Declaration of Independence or the Life of Frederick Douglass, or things that are a lot more challenging than some of the narrative text that they'd read in the past. So developing, again, that academic vocabulary and reading the more challenging text is a way that we're fostering the critical thinking. I had said to Mr. Scaletta, we were discussing the recent testing in the hallway, and when I looked at the released items, even at the 3rd or 4th grade level, the students were asked to read maybe 3 nonfiction pieces on the same topic and be able to compare and contrast them. That's a much more difficult task than in the past, where they were bubbling in an answer based on recall from a piece of text.
Rick, do you find that parents are asking some of those type of questions, like this is so much different, or that those parents who are more involved will see a better success rate as well?
We're getting, we were early adopters, like I said, of the Common Core in elementary. What we're hearing is positive feedback from parents. They like the fact that their kids are being asked to think critically. They recognize it's not what they learn, read a story, answer some questions about very basic information. It's a higher level of critical thinking, and our parents are pleased to see that.
I wanted to ask about the integration of curriculum too in Common Core. So when you're in English class, you're not necessarily reading a story, but you might be reading something that ties in with the unit you're doing in history. That's my understanding, that perhaps there's more integration across the disciplines so that students see why they're learning what they're learning as opposed to just completing an exercise?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Our teachers took training on the Literacy Design Collaborative, and they've developed units that can be found on the SAS site, but they do the same. If they're studying the Depression in social studies, they're reading about the Depression in their English Language Arts class. And hopefully all this information helps to fill in their background knowledge, and then eventually they write to that, and then those essays are scored by both the English and the social studies teachers. So we are trying to integrate some of this knowledge across the content areas. And when I say we're moving to nonfiction, there's still literature in English class, and we certainly don't think it's the job of the English teacher to incorporate all of this nonfiction, because obviously it can be found in science and social studies and across the board. So really, reading has become a process by which kids learn. I hate when people categorize it as just a subject area, because it's important for all of our teachers to be teaching our students to read in their own content area as well. So that's become very important. And then in mathematics, again, the shifts are focus, which every conference I go to, they show me the big, thick math book that's used in the United States. And then they tell me in the countries where they're achieving more, it's very thin, because there are fewer topics, but they're covering them more in depth. So we're looking, they tell us in our emphasis guides what should be emphasized at each of these grade levels. So focusing on fewer topics in greater depth is something that we're moving towards, and just the idea of coherence, that across your math curriculum these ideas are repeated. They're certainly not standalones, they're certainly not mnemonics or tricks. They must hang together. And then the authentic application of the mathematics, that the problems should have something to do with real life. So I got to visit a school near in Maryland. I'm not sure exactly what city at this point, but the students were working on designing a house. And so they were designing all of the rooms, they were doing the dimensions of the rooms, they were adding a swimming pool, and they were using all their mathematics on this task that was authentic. And I will have to say, they were much more engaged than the students that I see sitting in class working their way through a worksheet.
You know what, we really are close to having to wrap this up. I just really wanted to touch on graduation. We had talked a little bit about the graduation rates and how, if you look on Erie Vital Signs, you'll see that. But there's so much that goes into that, Rick.
Well, I think when you're looking at statistics, you have to always be aware of what the statistic is saying and what it is not saying. And you have to understand where the statistic comes from. For example, the definition of a graduate is now they enter ninth grade and 4 years later they graduate. So it does not take into account any child who may need an additional semester to graduate, nor does it take into account special education students who we are required to educate until they are 21. So in any given year in a smaller school district, if you have a large number of special needs students who have stayed longer, you're going to get hit, and it's going to look like you have a bad graduation rate.
And they don't take that out and
Correct.
make provisions for that.
So
And how about English as a second language students, as the Erie School District
would be true as well.
experiencing?
Would be true. So there's no accounting for that. So it's just you're in, you're out in 4 years. So that's the first thing we need to understand. Graduation rate, I think, depends on a number of things. Things that the school can help with is learner engagement. Keeping kids engaged in their learning is number one. Number two is relevancy, and that's where the career and college standards come in. What am I going to use this for? You know, kids will say. So giving them some kinds of relevancy. But beyond that, there's a host of social issues that make it difficult to keep students in school. And you know, certainly Erie deals with that more than we do at General McLean, but we see it growing as well. And that is a very, very difficult challenge.
Well, unfortunately, we do have to end this particular segment of our program. I know time has gone fast. I want to thank both of our experts. We are going to be joined with 2 additional local journalists in the conversation as we complete the Erie Now program, focusing on education. So we'll be back in just a minute. Hello, I'm Cindy Patton, and this is Erie Now, a WQLN discussion program on Erie Vital Signs. We have been exploring education in our community for these last few minutes, and we are joined now by Ben Spigen, who is the managing editor of Erie Reader magazine, and Jeff Pinsky, who is the former Erie Times news editor and recently retired associate director of PR and marketing at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania. We're also joined once again with Lisa Adams from Lilly Broadcasting and Erica Irwin from the Erie Times. We added this segment to our program at the end because we found that each time we end up ending the program, we end up with a pretty lively discussion after each of these shows. So since Ben, you're just joining us, give us your take on some of the discussion we've had.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that there seems like a lot of hope. You know, people seem to be hopeful that the trend is upward. But one of the things that I found disheartening is to look at the Erie Vital Signs as far as education goes. 4 out of the 6 indicators are mixed or inconclusive, and the other 2 are either negative or need improvement. So that paints a pretty bleak picture to me. So I wonder, how do we begin solving this problem? Because it's certainly complex. I don't think one change is going to fix everything as far as improving education in Erie.
I do think that some of the experts thought that they had programs in place, getting people to understand either that those programs were there, or getting the word out, or getting the legislature behind it. I thought it all comes down to money sometimes. And that's the bottom line all the time, and it's just not always there. I don't know what you
Well, clearly, funding is going to be a big issue, because you can talk about pushing for pre-K, but we're seeing the shrinking number of faculty members and shrinking number of buildings and neighborhood schools. So we've seen drastic cuts in not just the city of Erie, but really in schools in the whole region dealing with those factors. I have to say I am a little concerned. Obviously, we want our kids to be college and career ready, but I'm a little concerned if you're trying to get a 7th grader to know what they want to do with their life. I'm such an advocate of a liberal arts education. I really think schools should be focusing on teaching kids how to learn, teaching kids to love learning, and teaching kids to do excellence with whatever it is they're doing. Because if they leave school with those skills, then they'll be able to navigate the college and career decision-making process as they grow up, I guess.
What did you think?
Well, Cindy, what I took away from that first segment, which is the longest segment, had to do with pre-K, was fascinating because it's absolutely true, and this has been going on, this conversation has been going on for probably 40 years or so. But the fact remains that in Pennsylvania, the school code under the law says that parents don't have to enroll their children in school until they're 8 years old. Now, after the school year starts,
okay, I didn't know that.
8 years old.
Okay.
And if the school year starts and their birthday is 2 weeks later, they get to stay out another year, so they're almost 9 years old when they have to enroll. Now, in Philadelphia, that's different because local school boards can make their own decision on when parents have to enroll their children. And in Philadelphia, the age is 6 years old. So one of the first things that we have to do is abandon that agri-society kind of culture and that thinking that goes back 150 years or more in our educational system and start to demand that children are enrolled in school and in pre-K programs right from the start. So there's no argument about it, and there can be no argument about it.
I think going back to funding, one of the big discussions right now is this creating a fair funding formula so that districts across the state can have a fair piece of the pie from the state to fund programs, help fund programs like pre-K and other efforts. That's going on right now. There's a commission dedicated to kind of overhauling the current formula and figuring out how best to allocate this shrinking pot of
Meaning that
state
certain
dollars.
school districts that may be considered poorer school districts get a larger piece of the pie as opposed to
Potentially.
middle as opposed to upper.
We don't know what it would look like yet,
Okay.
but right now there's a provision in the current formula that's called hold harmless, which means even if districts are losing students, the state is not going to take money away from them. So even as demographics are shifting, we need a new formula to address those shifting
Some
demographics.
states actually, your property taxes, everything goes into that one pool, and they allocate pretty much the same for everyone. So there is an even playing field there. You don't have a situation such as in Erie County where you have a wonderful school district like Fairview, where I live, in Fairview, and then you have problems, and especially the economic problems you have in the Erie School District. So that maybe that commission will resolve some of that to make the playing field a lot more equal for all the school districts across the state, whether they're urban, whether they're in the burbs, or whether they're rural.
Well, and I think that came out in the first segment that we had, and we were also talking, Ben, that you have great programs for the folks who don't really have the wherewithal to afford them. And you also have programs for the people who can afford them. And then that middle of the road always seems to get hit and does not necessarily have easy access.
I think access is the key word there, and I think when we think about education, we think about public funding, but we also have to think about private funding and just these families and where families can afford to send their kids to get a better education, to get a better start, because so much research indicates that so much learning happens in the first 5 years of life. Mm-hmm. So it is vital that we get these kids into some sort of pre-K program, but if you've got two parents who are working 1 to 2 jobs each and can't afford to send their children to this program, you're going to see those people fall behind as well, and there's no sort of safety net in the middle to catch those people. So some sort of emphasis on that, I think, would better help, and maybe a more evenly spread distribution of funds that we're talking about that would help those families in need.
Well,
Erica
and
talked
I
about-
also wanted to talk to you about the thing that when we were talking about college preparedness and just what you had just said, I think that having somebody explore and to provide that 7th grader or 10th grader with some ideas not just based on what you want to do. Ask any 7th grader what they want to do, and you're not going to get a clear-cut answer.
And
I
as-
want to be a nurse.
As I said earlier,
But-
those interest surveys are not necessarily
they're
the way,
not.
because everybody could say, check the box that says, I like to work outside with animals. But
Exactly.
that doesn't mean that that's where their aptitude
Or is that
lies.
going to be where their job will lie at the end of that graduation rate or college term that they may have? Is that job going to be there?
It makes more sense for the teachers who know them the most in the classroom to be fanning the flames of where their interest and talent lies as
Right.
they see that develop. Does that necessarily have a career label on it? I don't really think so. And when Eric was talking about the funding formula thing, I think another big issue right now is this per pupil subsidy question when it comes to these charter schools that are starting up. It seems like public school systems are having to beat back this charter school monster, and it could be a wonderful thing because maybe it is being developed because it's filling a need that isn't being filled. But if school districts are seeing some of their funding shift over there, and what is the formula for the funding to shift over there, I think that's an issue right now that is going to continue to be a problem.
I would tell you in the Erie School District in particular, and this is a more of a challenge for urban school districts, I would say charter schools is one of the top issues and the top challenges that the Erie School District is facing. In 14-15, they will pay more than $17 million in charter school tuition alone, and that's only increasing as more charter schools look to start. And at the same time, a line item in the budget to reimburse some of that tuition back to the school districts, that line item is not funded. Based on if it were funded, the school district would be eligible to receive almost $8 million back in reimbursement for
That's
that
the
funding.
rob Peter to pay Paul kind of a thing.
But that $8 million would completely
Do a lot.
cover the deficit, for
Right.
instance. So that's something that I know is a big frustration and a big challenge
Public
right now.
education, from what I saw on the first two segments and from the experts that were here, public education is doing its job. Okay, it is doing its job. It's really not, education isn't the bad guy. Society in general, some of the things that Ben has said already about creating these equal playing fields, about the middle of us, the middle class of us getting the short end of the stick. Those kind of things, dealing with urban education where the majority of the students get their meals in school, not at home. Public education has these students for maybe 11% of their lives from when they're 5 or 6 years old to when they're 17 or 18 years old. Who has them the rest of the time of their life, that 88%? It's the parents, it's society, it's their churches, it's the neighborhoods. Unless all that comes together with all these indicators of vital signs, because they're all overarching, then education is not going to go anymore. We have the highest, best trained teachers that we've ever had before, and we have the best programs that we've ever had. And yet society is not backing public education.
And maybe this is, going off what Jeff's saying, maybe this is on a more global level, but, maybe this begs the question too, why do we break for summer for education? Why don't we have year-round, education? And when it's still driven by the idea of that agriculture of, well, let's take the summers off so we can all return to work the farms.
Actually, isn't there a school that there was a school, I thought, that was
There are schools that are
just in
doing
the
this.
news. Here, though, there was the school that had the kids going back.
I think that's a way that we could use that model to move toward in the future, to say we don't need to try to cram 1 year's worth of education into such a short amount of time and then allow students to be on their own throughout the summer. What are they doing during the summer? Are they getting that educational resource at home? Are they getting the meals like Jeff mentioned? All of those sort of things. And maybe that's too easy of an answer, but I think it's one certainly worth looking at.
Well, and I also do think that, it does take the parent to make the mold, and it does take the parent to help to focus. And I do think that the experts that we had here also talked a lot about educating the parents on the programs, on the access. And getting that word out was just as important as getting to the student and the student level.
We're still doing 3 months off in the summer so they can work in the fields, the students. All right, we're back to that agro model. that's 150 or 200 years old. That's what has to change, and that's what Ben makes a wonderful point.
And in talking to some of the people involved, at least in the Erie School District, in working on implementing Common Core, that's something they take into account, what's lost over the summer and what you have to do to review at the beginning of the year to make sure students are, you know, if you're saying, here's where you need to be at the end of the school year, they're stunned sometimes when kids come back at the beginning of the school year of what they have to do to review.
Well, and I do think that there is a mentality for some parents, and it's across the education spectrum, that is, let them play. You know, there's so much structure. Let them play.
I think that education could be part of that structure. I think, you know, keywords that I really appreciated what Lisa said earlier was just the liberal arts education. You know, make learning fun, find a way to make it more engaging. I think less emphasis on career, because I think sometimes that can convince somebody that, you know, well, what career do you want? And at such a young age where, you know, you hardly know yourself and know the world.
Can I change my mind?
Yeah, can I change my mind? And you feel locked into that. And I think also, you know, what may sway people to pick certain career paths is just money. You know, what's going to make me money? You know, if I enroll into, you know, being a nurse, will I make money being a nurse? Okay, I want to be a nurse. Maybe that's not where the aptitude is. Maybe that's not where the love is. So I think that if there's an emphasis on the love of learning, then using this, you know, liberal arts system of really engaging people in that process, then that'll allow people to explore more and find out where their aptitudes are, where their strengths are, and really follow those and not make a rash decision at the age of 12 or 13.
But I will tell you, a lot of teachers will say they feel hamstrung. Now, the best teachers can do wonderful things under any circumstances, but all of these teachers right now are working under tremendously difficult circumstances with all the standards they have to meet. So much of the year is dedicated simply to meeting those standards, that there's often not a lot of room for improvisation and fun and hands-on learning, although there is a lot of that happening, but it all has to be done within this construct of standards that have to be met.
Unfortunately, this is bringing our program to an end. You know, we hope that we've enlightened you in the examination of education. We hope that we've spurred on maybe some discussions and things like that among your own family members. I'd like to thank our group of panelists for participating in the discussion, and certainly our esteemed panel of journalists who have really provided the whole point of making this a great group discussion. If you want to look more into education, you can visit the Erie Vital Signs webpage. It's www.erievitalsigns.org. You can like them on Facebook, follow on Twitter, and that would be using the hashtag ErieNow. I'm Cindy Patton. We really hope that we've enlightened you in some way or another, and we want to thank you so much for joining us for this program as well.